Good morning, or good afternoon, everyone. This is episode 2 of the Are You Lost podcast. On today's episode, we're going to talk about vulnerability, everyone's favorite subject. So stay tuned.
Cost me a lot of years, things that I would hear near my furthest fears, steering clear of the teary eyed. When I was near them guys, I was out of character. Bad actors out of our America, a different vision from them sorry cameras.
Hello, everyone. I got to get away from saying good morning to everyone. I always say good morning, assuming people are listening to me like they're waking up with me, and that can't be your waking up. That'd be the worst possible situation that you have found yourself in, is waking up to my voice, pontificating to you about whatever shit I'm pontificating about now. So on today's episode, I'm going to talk about vulnerability, which is kind of like, it's funny. I've had this conversation with a lot of different people, right? When it's like, especially with men, obviously. I mean, men are the more famous versions of non-vulnerable beings, or this idea that being vulnerable is some sort of sign of weakness or something like that. And to be clear, vulnerability, like that feeling, is something that that essentially just ties into the nature of our fight or flight, which we never actually evolved outside of. And there's a ton of science about this, essentially, where it's like, we are, our fight or flight is like a leftover from a prior era of trying to survive in the wild with animals and stuff like that. And as we evolved and found ourselves in homes and working jobs, our fight or flight is constantly being triggered by things that it should not be triggered by. And so with vulnerability, I think that kind of still exists in the same way, where the fear of being vulnerable is more of a fear that it ties back into the idea that, we're out in the open, we can be attacked, or we could be, some wild animal could ravage us or our camp, or, whatever it is, or a different, group of people, or whatever it is, but really isn't necessarily the case anymore. And so, I've had conversations with people, and I always find it fascinating when I ask them, when we start talking about things like vulnerability, and I ask, what are you afraid of exactly? Like, what does it mean to be vulnerable to you? And there's never really a good answer, right? It's like, well, I don't want to express, how I feel, or express, how I feel to people, or let them know, or, have them thinking that I'm weak, or you can be taken advantage of. And I'm okay, but how would they take advantage of you, right? How exactly are they going to take advantage of you? So if I know that you have feelings, right, that you are in love with someone, or, you've had your heart broken, how could I take advantage of that? How would I leverage this situation to essentially keep you at bay? Now, listen, this doesn't account for situations where, if you're in an abusive relationship, whether you're a man or a woman, either could be in abusive relationships, whether it's emotional or mental or physical, obviously, then sure, your vulnerability can be leveraged. If you've ended up in a cult by accident, your vulnerability can be leveraged. It's kind of like part of their thing to get, to get stuff to blackmail you with. So being vulnerable in those situations can be used against you. Sure, that I understand. But in our normal day-to-day lives, if you're not in any of those situations, if you're a single person, single man or woman, what is vulnerability exactly being used against you for, right? What is the fear of being able to express yourself that someone could somehow come and take advantage of that? And that's an interesting question. Most people don't have an answer to that, right? Because like with most mental health things, whether it's anxiety or, or like one thing I always talk about when you see people like online or on Instagram, I see this all the time, right? Where people are like posting things like, oh, let the haters hate, and they have like 15 Instagram followers. And not that that matters, because to be clear, the number of followers you have does not validate you as a human being. And if you do feel that way, then probably get off Instagram, because it's probably bad for you, or any social media platform, as I'm going to probably talk about on every single one of these episodes. But a lot of times, it's just pointing out that they have 15 followers is more about the point that who's hating on you. So of these one of these 15 people here hate you for some reason. Like, why are they hating on you? Why are you their friend? But a lot of times what's actually happening is a projection, right? You are projecting your own negative dialogue onto the faces. And, I had this conversation recently with somebody about our own, that inner dialogue, right? The inner voice, right? And how familiar it is, but yet it's still we still are able to kind of, like, in a lot of ways, we can't distinguish it, but we can. We almost assign that inner dialogue to a familiar face that we know. The voice, though, sounds extremely familiar. It kind of sounds like our voice, but not exactly. So we think it's coming from somewhere else. But in reality, it's just coming from inside of us, right? And it's somebody told you something one time or whatever it was. And anytime someone questions you now, you believe that someone's hating on you. And now you're over here on Instagram, you're saying, oh, the haters, this, blah, blah, blah. And it's like no one's really hating on you. It's actually you're not believing in yourself and you're assigning that to other people, right? So when we're talking about vulnerability and like things that could weaken you, what like, well, it makes me vulnerable, it makes me open to some sort of attack. This is not like this is not McAfee, you know what I mean? Your web browser is not like is not open to some sort of like internet savagery, right? You're not really available to any attack. Actually, the only thing that you're available to is confronting feelings that you've been afraid to confront, right? That's what you're actually afraid of in reality, but you're assigning different enemies. You're creating enemies in your mind that are going to attack you with this information. But in reality, talking about that information and being vulnerable about these things actually just makes you feel afraid that you have to now confront those things, right? And it's funny, like a lot of people, I'm like, everyone knows me for being very vulnerable. And I'm about to say something that's extremely fucking vulnerable, right? And it's something real. And the reason to be clear, the reason why I like being vulnerable, and I talked about this at this event I was on Sunday, and that being vulnerable makes people comfortable, right? And actually, shout out to the homie Izzy from Blueprint Barber Lounge, the person who was running this event, who invited me to it. On some of my advice, he decided to be kind of more vulnerable, just be himself, right? I told him, in getting a haircut, I won't get into the specific details of that conversation, but essentially he walked out of that and he decided, you know what? I'm going to go be more authentic when I'm talking to people. And just that sparked other people being more vulnerable when they're speaking about their business or what their plans are. Now we're getting to like real shit, right? To the real shit where it's not this, I'm going to come out here and start saying big businessy words that sound good because, we're all putting on this facade to impress each other. No, we're going to get to the nitty gritty here, right? Let's talk. What are you doing? What's your dream? Why do you want to do that, right? Fuck the vulnerability, right? What are you going to do here? Why do you want to do this? And that's like one of the things that mattered to me was like, you know what? I'm not afraid to be vulnerable. And back to the point I was going to make a second ago about being vulnerable. For a long time, and anyone who knows me knows I had really bad self-confidence issues. It's really complicated. Self-confidence and self-esteem is a very complicated conversation. Not to rhyme, bars is what I do, but it's a very complicated thing, because in some facets, there's a lot of different versions of ourselves and how we perceive ourselves. There's a version of ourselves that we perceive that is perceived by how we perceive others perceive us. And then how we perceive ourselves is almost two separate things. So like for me, I would have a lot of self-esteem issues on how I was perceived outside, right? I felt like people viewed me in a very negative light, but how I viewed myself was positive generally. But I would find myself being overly vulnerable for the most awful reasons. I would be vulnerable because I was kind of like, hey, I'm so fucking terrible that I'm going to just bare my scars to you so you know how awful I am. So you can just peep how terrible I am of a person, and then you can just get the fuck away from me kind of thing, right? That was like how I would do it for a really long time. And then as I got older, and this is kind of a hilarious theme of my life where I do something that like now in this age where mental health is so like encouraged and speaking about it so encouraged, I had been doing this for years, except I had been doing it for all the wrong reasons. You know what I mean? I had essentially been doing it for the wrong reasons, but I was never afraid to express myself. In fact, I was probably so afraid to get close to people that I expressed myself so they would get the fuck away from me kind of thing. And it turned into a skill, kind of turned into like a talent where like, yeah, being vulnerable gives people the opportunity to express themselves, right? If I can be comfortable around you, you know what I mean? And like the thing is, because for a long time, and I had this conversation with a friend of mine at the gym last year, 6 months ago, I don't know. And I had told him, like there's this weird thing, right? Because the gym is a very vulnerable place, and when you're big, this dude, shout outs to him. I won't give his information away, but he was an athlete. older gentleman now, successful, but is still jacked like an athlete. He was a professional athlete, and he's still built like one. And I told him, I asked him, look around the gym. Do you see anybody here who's fat, overweight? And he was like, no. It was like a Sunday midday. I'm like, yeah, I'm the only fat person here in this gym. Think about that. Because this is the scariest place to come to when you're big. The only reason I go is because I love playing basketball, and because I'm good at it. It gives me a space where when I feel vulnerable, when I feel, like my social anxiety is taking over and I don't want to be on the gym floor anymore, there's a sense of control in the basketball court, right? I have a sense of control there. So I can always have a space to be vulnerable because I always had these like talents, or I had a skill, right? Or like, for a long time, being a rapper was like a freak show, like, oh, can you go ahead and spit something? And I would go do it, and now everyone's cool, or me, if you know me, right? Generally, so my social anxiety would do this. It's not that it would do it. This is just my personality, but it would also help my social anxiety, which is to be kind of a loudmouth, be boisterous, joke around with people, and everyone would see that. And if I could make everyone laugh, it gave me control, right? But, a lot of times I think that's probably why people are afraid to be vulnerable. It makes them feel out of control. They're not in control of the situation. They're maybe afraid people are going to laugh at their vulnerability. And, nothing. It's funny because, I like something like that, right? Someone laughing at your vulnerability. It seems like on the surface, if you've spent no time really digging into your own emotions or how you feel about things, it may sound to you kind of like bullshit, right? Like someone's going to laugh at my feeling. Who gives a fuck, right? And it's like, yeah, but no, you do give a fuck. You actually care, right? Because that would be hurtful if someone laughed at how you felt. So, I kind of benefited from accidentally being vulnerable my whole life. And also because back to the basketball thing, right? Because also, I'm 6'4", a big dude, been big my whole life. Most people find me threatening. So I could be vulnerable and not feel threatened by most people, right? You couldn't physically threaten me. Most people couldn't, not that I'm violent or a fighter, but it's just the what I give off, the vibe I give off, apparently, you know what I mean? Especially back in the day when I was more socially anxious, I would have the face of someone who was, get the fuck away from me. And so being vulnerable was kind of easy. And maybe even in a lot of ways, thinking about it now, maybe I always wished I could be vulnerable to people, but I was so anxious around people. I didn't like being in groups of people that, I was just terrified almost, you know what I mean? So maybe I felt like I couldn't be vulnerable. But it was kind of like a crazy skill. And, there's a ton of positive reasons why being vulnerable is important. One, if you're in a leadership position, if you're in any leadership position, if you're a leader in your family, if you're a leader at work, you're a leader at anything, being vulnerable has a ton of benefits, right? Essentially, one, it builds trust, right? If you're willing to be vulnerable to an employee, you could almost be a dick to them after that, right? But the point that you were vulnerable shows that you're human. We're so busy, like we were so busy, one, identifying with our jobs too much, where we think that we are this, you know what I mean? We are our job, that you lose the humanity, and all of a sudden there's like this disconnect between people. But in reality, it's just people, right? We're just working to find a thing. A lot of companies, more recruiters I talk to now, talk about finding cultural fits, right? And I've benefited from that because I don't have a fucking degree. It was something I was like ashamed of for a long time. Anyone who knows me, I didn't finish college. It wasn't my thing. I was smart, but I couldn't do it. So, but they want to find a cultural fit, and I fit in most cultures. Because I'm funny, because I'm a funny person and I'm a little bit smart sometimes. So, being vulnerable allows other people to see that side of you that's human, and allows empathy to come in, right? It allows people to be empathetic with each other. It gives space and patience for each other, right? So that's like one of the huge things. Another thing is it like attracts people who you want to be around. If you could bare your scars to people and they could see, right? They can see those scars and they can choose to stay and accept it. Don't you want those people around? Wouldn't you want someone around who accepted your vulnerability, accepted you at your worst or your best? But then if you had people who were uncomfortable, I remember talking to a female. This happened a couple of years ago. And I told her how I was looking for a therapist, and it was, early on in us talking or whatever. And she was turned off, and, she just reacted kind of, I guess I would call it immaturely. I don't, what do I know? I don't know if it was I don't know. She was older than me, but she reacted immaturely. You know what I mean? And she was just kind of like, she wanted to stop talking to me. It freaked her out. Now, maybe it wasn't immature. Maybe she had a bad experience with a prior situation where the guy maybe needed therapy and, maybe he was violent towards her. Maybe that was off-putting to her. That wasn't the vibe I got, but what do I know, right? I'm not a fortune teller. I couldn't see into her life. But I remember thinking at that time, how far away are we from like real growth if you think that you're just fine all the time? Like you're just perfectly okay with the amount of feedback we get from social media constantly, all the issues that it causes, like the negative feelings that we feel, the constant cycle of news that's mad depressing, especially recently, the amount of like seclusion that we all feel at times, and you don't think you need therapy, the amount of unresolved trauma that you probably carry from your childhood, and you think therapy is some sort of, would be some sort of like, to treat therapy like it's some sort of negative thing, as opposed to being like, wow, this person is going to therapy because he recognizes that he has issues that need to be resolved. And it's like, but you're treating it as if I'm just like a crazy person who's off a leash. And it's like, yeah, but that's kind of the point, right? It's like, yeah, so this person, shout out to her. It might be a good person, I have no idea, right? But that person won't be for me, right? That person is not for me. A lot of times we're hiding, like when you're like trying to not be vulnerable. This happens a lot with online dating. If you do online dating constantly, there's like this, and social media, again, not to beat the dead horse, but where people are desperately trying to live this ideal version of their life, right? That's not real. They're just desperately trying to live this idealized version of their life to put out this image. And really, I think people assume that it's like, but you're doing that for other people. And I actually don't think that's completely true. I think it's easy to assume because it's on social media. But I remember thinking on Twitter a few years ago, like I would post my thoughts on Twitter. I would see other people post their thoughts on Twitter. You would get no likes, no retweets. No one would respond to you. You were talking to yourself, right? You're not, and I, you, me, right? Me. I was talking to myself. You know what I mean? I was talking to myself. It was like I wanted myself to be heard, to me, in a lot of ways. I think sometimes people are doing that. Maybe, I don't know if it's as much as I want people to be impressed with me, as much as I want people to think I'm impressive so that I could feel impressive, right? You understand what I'm saying? So it's really about you wanting to feel impressive. So you want to impress other people, but it's not about putting those people down. Because I think we treat it like that, where it's like, people just want you to feel down on your life. They want to big up their life. And it's not quite that. I think it's more that they're so down on their life. They want to impress somebody so that they can feel impressed about what they're doing, right? And online dating, it's like crazy. I've talked to so many people online dating, not to brag. But I guess that's really not, for dudes, that's braggadocious. I don't think for women, that's like a thing you would ever brag about. It's like, so you talk to a lot of people and none of them, and you're still single, right? And it's like, yes, I guess I should probably be ashamed of that. But I've talked to a lot of people and, you would look at their profile, read it, and they would say, yeah, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. And then when you would talk to them and you would kind of gauge where they're actually at, they're actually not doing X, Y, and Z yet. They have the intentions of doing X, Y, and Z, or they're on the way to do some of the things to start doing X, Y, and Z, but that's not where they are yet. And it's it's kind of like where we live this fake life because we're afraid that if we're vulnerable and if we showed you who we really were, it wouldn't be good enough. It's a lot of this always comes down to worthiness, a lot of self-esteem issues, most issues in general, a fear of being vulnerable is about worthiness. That if you're vulnerable, somehow your vulnerabilities, the things that make you human, right? Like those perceived negative things about you, that from my standpoint are the things that make us the beautiful, like things that we are, like these things full of life. It's like you can't, right? It's the cliche, right? You can't have light without shadow. And it's like, yeah, you can't have love without pain. You can't have this without that. And all of those pains inside of us that make us grow, like that's like the most beautiful and most important parts of us. And it's like, you're afraid that those things that make you beautiful and those things that make you human also are the same exact things that don't make you worthy anymore. And that sucks. That sucks. And that's like, it's so, our minds are like really, really complicated, right? It's like probably my favorite thing to tell people. Our minds are really complicated. That's true. But they're also really fucking simple. It's so easy to manipulate our minds. We don't really realize it's happening. That's why I always talk like, I don't know if I said this on my last podcast or not. I can't remember. About I had watched a bunch of, when I was going through my eating disorder, and one day I'll tell that whole story. But when I was going through my eating disorder, I had also been watching a bunch of documentaries on cults. And there was one lady who said, she said essentially like she was in the cult and she had just gotten out of it, right? And she had said essentially that people, I think I did talk about this, I don't know, whatever, that people, anytime she met people who said I could never be in a cult, it's like people who are weak or whatever the fuck it is, she would be like, yeah, that person is the most likely to end up in a cult, right? And it makes sense because that's the least self-aware person. You're so not self-aware, you don't realize how easy it is to manipulate you, and that's exactly why they can manipulate you and get you into this cult, because these people are very what's the word? They have like mad charisma, very charismatic, and therefore they convince you of things, and before you know it, yeah, you're fucking castrating yourself. You don't even know how you got there. And it's like, yeah, because our minds are so easy to manipulate. One small thing happens, and a year later, we have no fucking idea why we're all of a sudden like addicted to drinking soda or something like that. Because this one small random thing happened, and now our behaviors have shifted. And when you look at what you were doing 6 months ago to what you're doing 6 months later, you have no semblance of clue how the fuck you got there. And it's because, like, yeah, as complicated as our minds are, that's the complicated part, is how the behavior got built to this. That's complicated. But what altered our mind to get there was mad simple. It was very simple. It was like this small event. It was like a rock in the pond, like a rock in a flowing river. If you throw one rock in a flowing river, how it can just alter the current just a tiny bit. It might even alter it in a way that you can't tell, right? It's imperceptible to you, but it altered it a little bit. And that's exactly how our minds are. Just that small pebble can just shift how our current goes. You know what I mean? And like those things happen when we're children. We don't even realize it, because there's a ton of data that talks about how we generally lean towards negative things. And the best way I heard this put was, I can't remember who said this. Essentially, she said, if you let's say you get a job review, right? You go to a review and your boss tells you you did great on A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Great. But on H, probably need a little bit of work on. The chances are when you leave that review, you're just going to be focused on H. A through G doesn't even matter anymore. Yeah, you killed this, but because H, you're going to be obsessing over H, as opposed to being appreciative of all the good things that they just said about you. You're going to be obsessing over the bad thing, and you're going to, depending on your level of on how bad your neurosis might be, you're going to just be putting yourself down constantly about H. And that's going to be because something happened when you were a kid, and we gravitate towards the negative things so much. That's kind of the point of that story, is that we tend to gravitate towards negative things. It's why when they replay an injury on Fox, like during a football game, everyone's watching. I don't fucking want to watch it, but everyone else is going to watch it because we gravitate towards that. We want to see the car accident. It's how we are. It's kind of like part of the human experience for whatever reason. And so because of that, something happened when you were a child. And I have a ton of stories to tell about this. I just don't want to waste all of your time talking about this, about how my self-esteem got so fucking jacked up. One bad thing happened to you as a child, or one person said one negative thing to you, and you carried that for so long that now every fucking conversation after that is essentially just tinted by that. You can't see conversations without the glass that's in front of you, without that glass being tinted. So you're only seeing it through the scope of these negative beliefs and these like one negative experience that shaped how you believe yourself. It's kind of like to the point of, the old cliche, right? You'll never be able to love anyone until you know how to love yourself. And that's true. And the reason why it's true is because essentially you're the glass. What's the word I'm actually trying to think of? Not the window, but whatever. The window you look at the world through, right? That lens, the lens. Damn. This is why I didn't go to college. The lens you look at the world through. That lens, essentially, it can be incredible, right? That lens can be can magnify the world in so many beautiful ways if you've done the work to clean it and make it that powerful. But it could also jade everything you look at, because you can only look through that lens. And if you've jaded that lens with so much shit because of so many negative experiences that went unresolved, you'll only be able to see how far it allows you to see. So you can only accept love in a way that you understand love through this lens, right? But until you clean that lens, love can never be let in, right? And same thing, and this is what it's all about. That's essentially what it's about. I forgot what the point of this was. What was the point of this? I don't have anyone here to answer that question for me. But yeah, so essentially, be vulnerable is the point of this podcast. Be vulnerable, because vulnerability is a really, really powerful thing, and it's a beautiful thing. And start by being vulnerable with yourselves, right? Start with self-awareness, which is self-awareness is probably going to be one of the underlying themes of every single episode of this, because it's what a lot of behavioral psychologists or gurus, yogis, and all these people essentially would say is the medication for most of these ailments is self-awareness. Understanding your thoughts when they come and allowing them to pass and addressing them and labeling them and moving on from them, right? That's all based in self-awareness. Until you are actually spending any time being self-aware, whether it be through meditation, whether it be through journaling, you're actually not able to even understand half of the thoughts or feelings you're feeling, especially because social media, these things are flying at us so fast. You don't even know. You go from feeling sad to happy in an instance, like unnatural. It's just mad unnatural. You're unable to actually quantify any of our experiences because they're just moving so quickly. And self-awareness can help with that. It's like, the main thing. And if you can be self-aware with yourself, that means you can start being vulnerable with yourself, because you can actually look at your emotions and you can actually allow yourself to feel those emotions and allow yourself to sit in those emotions. And when you actually kind of work through all of those things, when you actually learn self-acceptance, being vulnerable is easy. It's easy because you realize that nothing can actually affect you but you, right? You're the only thing that's going to affect you. There's a branch of psychology called REBT, which I've been spending some time reading to help with the life coaching thing. And it stands for Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. And essentially the main tenet of it is events don't actually make you sad. Your response to the event is what makes you sad, right? Because you're responding in a way that's sad. But if the event was perceived as a happy event to somebody else, it would make them happy. But to you, it's making you sad. And therefore, it's about controlling how you view the event, right? How you accept those things that happen to you. You know what I mean? And there's a ton of stuff about that too that we're going to get into down the line about truly accepting all the bad shit that happened to us too. That's inexplicable. All the inexplicable, awful shit that's happened to us that can't be undone or fixed, but that we can take and try to glean pieces of information or things that we can learn from these events and bring into our life. You know what I mean? So we'll talk about that. But that's it. Be vulnerable. Love each other. Love yourself. Be vulnerable to yourself. Accept yourself. I think that's how I want to sign off on these podcasts. Be vulnerable. Love yourself. Accept yourself. That's it. I'll see you later.
Me a lot of years, things that I would hear near my furthest fear, steering clear of the teary eyed. When I was near them guys, I was out of character. Bad actors out of our America, a different vision from them sorry cameras. Dreaming, walking up 5th Street, demons.